The 4 dangers of chemsex that every gay man should know. Hey guys, Michael Pizzulo here, gay therapist in West Hollywood. So most gay men are familiar with the concept of chemsex. If you're not, it's basically using substances to enhance and augment the sexual experience. Kind of like the party and play culture that you may have heard of, right? There's been a lot of talk about this. It's a huge issue in our community. It's something that I've done a lot of specialized work in as a therapist in addiction treatment and in the LGBT addiction treatment space. But I want to give you 4 real dangers of chemsex that you may not be aware of if you're not super familiar with what's going on. The first one is that chemsex rarely starts with meth. So usually when we think of chemsex, we think of some tweaker who's at a bathhouse for days, doing meth endlessly, and it's just a complete, late stage of addiction, total mess, right? It rarely starts that way. Most gay men, if you ask them, would you do meth? They'll say, no, of course not. Or, why would I get involved in that? Rarely does it start that way. Usually what it starts with is something else, like poppers, G, Adderall, something that seems more innocent. But what happens is that you get introduced to this world of using drugs and sex together in gay circumstances, and you have to keep upping the ante as you go along. And you start to get familiar with people who maybe do harder drugs, or maybe do this, or maybe do that. And next thing you know, you become desensitized and you begin going down the road that you never predicted going down. So that's the first thing. The second one is that chemsex completely distorts and causes dysfunction to your sexual system. Meaning that, ironically, a lot of people use, uppers, amphetamines, meth, and whatnot in chemsex to heighten arousal and heighten the sexual experience. That's the whole point initially, right? What ends up happening is that you actually end up experiencing a lot of sexual dysfunction toward the end of the drug use. And not only that, but once you stop using the substances, most people will find, especially in early sobriety, that their sexual arousal system is completely out of whack. They are experiencing a lot of erectile dysfunction, they're not having any arousal, or when they do have arousal, they immediately get cravings to use drugs. Everything gets really, really complicated, and the relationship between sex and drugs become completely intertwined, that it becomes very, very difficult to tease them apart. So you may think like, oh, I can just do this here and there and it'll be fine, but once your brain learns to associate sex and drugs together, it's really difficult to detangle them, and it can cause a lot of long-term, not permanent, but a lot of long-term sexual dysfunction that is difficult to work through, and usually is what leads people to relapse and go back on the substances. The third thing is that chemsex often leads you to engage in highly extreme sexual behaviors that you never would have engaged in if it weren't for the drug. So in sex addiction, we see this a lot where you have to keep upping the ante to get more of a high. So people begin doing more extreme things or looking more at more extreme pornography to get a high. And often later on, they feel really guilty and confused because they're engaging in things that they don't really find, arousing or enjoyable, but they're looking for something to create a thrill and something to create an extreme. And chemsex does something similar. And also, too, when you're on the substance, your inhibitions are much lowered, right? And you're high. So people often end up engaging in sexual acts that they literally find traumatizing later on. That in a sober moment, they are truly haunted and confused and even frightened by the things that they've been engaged in while they were on these substances, which can make it even more difficult to come back to a sober sexual life and lead them to just continue engaging with the same people who kind of get what they've been through. So it becomes really like a trap that it's hard to get out of. And then the fourth thing is that chemsex often leads to ongoing psychotic symptoms. So often we see someone, on the street talking to themselves, mumbling to themselves. We can tell they're in some sort of psychosis. We don't know if it's organic or drug-induced, maybe a little bit of both. Amphetamines, meth addiction will always lead to psychosis at some point, especially when there's sleep deprivation. But what people aren't aware of is that this can be lingering, meaning that even when you get sober, often for the first few weeks or couple months, you may experience ongoing psychotic symptoms. And people, when they think of psychosis, they think of, someone who's crazy and I could never do that, or so on and so forth. Well, chemistry is chemistry. If you expose yourself to a drug so much, eventually all of us will have some sort of break, especially if it's a stimulant that goes into psychotic features. So don't be surprised if psychosis becomes part of the journey. And once it does, it starts to become more and more frequent and more insidious. And don't be naive to that. Psychosis is not benign. It's not some Alice in Wonderland LSD trip where I'm having a good time and, no. It's scary, it's intrusive, it's usually about someone attacking me or attacking someone else, and it causes a lot of distortion and violence, and again, it's really quite scary to go through. So these are 4 things I think are so important to discuss. And, oftentimes people will say these things and say, I'm not trying to scare you, but in this case, I am trying to scare you. That is my goal, is to scare you. I want you to remember this and hear my voice if you are in the position where maybe you're considering dabbling with something or going down this road. I want you to remember this warning that chemsex is such a huge problem in the gay community, and it is not something that you want to get involved in, and it has nothing to do with how smart you are, how educated you are, or whatever it is. It will take you down. So I hope this scares you. I hope this is a real warning that it's just not worth it. And last thing I'll say too is that if you need help, make sure that you go to a therapist or a facility that is specialized in chemsex, particularly for gay men. Why I'm saying this is that most are not. The average treatment facility, average therapist has no training or experience in this, which is fine. It's kind of a niche thing. So make sure that you're seeing someone like myself or going to a facility that is really specialized in this type of work. As always, you can reach out to me if you want to work with me as a therapist or as a coach, but also if you need referrals to treatment facilities, there are quite a number of them, especially in metropolitan areas in the US. So help is definitely out there, but make sure you go to a program that will know what to do. So I'll leave it there. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments as always. And again, if you need resources, don't hesitate. I'll put some in the description, but don't hesitate to reach out. Subscribe to my channel if you want more content like this about gay men and substance use and mental health and relationships and all those sorts of things. And I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.